What is the roadmap to defeat self-sabotage, negative thinking, and learned helplessness? In these unprecedented times, you must get connected, get growing, get certain, and get attitude. The Get Attitude Podcast. And welcome to the GAP. We are here with an unreal guest and an unreal podcast just for you. If you're a person that is looking to increase the culture, if you're a person that's constantly bitching about your workplace or your work, we have somebody for you who can help. She wrote the book, Winning the Game of Work. She's an executive consultant and executive coach. And we want to welcome you to the Get Attitude Podcast, the award-winning Get Attitude Podcast. Jason, are we live or are we not live? I'm just curious.
Oh, we're live.
And when we go live, do we actually have the intro when we go live for people? Oh, sweet. I like that. Did you like the intro? Oh, well, so anyway, guys, look it. I'm Glenn Bill. Squirrel. I'm Glenn Bill. We're here with Jason Aaron, and we are here to help you get attitude. We are here to help you bridge the gap from who you are to who you want to become. And you know what? We got a good one today. Terry McDougall. Terry, welcome to the Get Attitude Podcast.
Glenn, it's great to be here.
I like it. Now, do you do a lot of podcasts? I know I got you up on Podbooker, but are do you have a podcast, and are you guesting on a lot of them?
I have a podcast. It's called Marketing Mambo. I talk to marketing leaders and people that work around the world of marketing from around the world. And I have been on probably 150 podcasts.
Oh, my gosh.
Since I started getting into it. I mean, I actually thank the pandemic for getting me into podcasting because my book, unfortunately, came out the month after the shutdown.
Oh, my God.
And I needed to find an alternative way besides book signings and my launch party that I had planned to get the word out.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So your podcast is about marketing. Is that correct? It's
about marketing and it's about life.
Yeah.
I'm a curious person. I like to hear people's stories, and the thing that they all have in common is that they work in or around the world of marketing. That was my career before I became a coach in 2017.
I like it. So when we have a lot of business owners that are on here, when we think about marketing, even though this is about attitude, but since we got one of the influencers and leaders in this subject, what is marketing? What do you teach your people that marketing is?
Marketing is about understanding what the target audience needs and sort of building a bridge between what you have and trying to influence them to take action. So, it's funny because it took me a while after I became a coach to realize that I'm doing the same thing now that I did when I was a marketing leader, which is trying to understand what someone's problem is, building a roadmap of how to get there, and then taking action to make it happen. That's what you do in marketing, and that's what you do in coaching.
Well, and that's what you do in life, isn't it? I mean, I always say everybody has two things in common: problems and relationships.
Yeah.
And most of our problems are because of our relationships when it's all said and done. So we are all marketing, not only in business, but we're marketing in personal life. And that's why I'd love to get your perspective on this thing called attitude. What's your definition of attitude?
It's the way that you see the world.
Cool.
The lens that you use through which to see the world. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that they've got a choice about that lens. Many people don't realize that they're looking through, say, a dirty window at the world, but you can choose to clean it. You can choose to replace it.
I love it. That's so good. Or smash it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. We have choices.
Who was your first attitude coach?
I guess it would be my mother.
Really? Tell us what is her name, and why was she your first attitude coach, and what did she teach you?
Well, my mom's name is Pat, and she just wasn't somebody that would allow me to have excuses about why I wasn't doing something. She really made me realize that I could determine the outcomes by the behaviors that I was willing to exhibit. And she was tough. she did not allow me to make excuses.
I love it.
And so I internalized that, because then I was like, okay, well, I know mom's going to make it hard on me if I try to wiggle out of this. So I might as well just do it right the first time.
Now, I know you mentioned you have a kid, so that's probably tough news for your son. Is that correct? How many kids you got? And do you say
I have 3?
You got
I have 3 kids.
And you ain't taking no excuses from them, correct?
Yeah, true. My goal, and this is something I teach a lot in coaching, my goal is to balance support and challenge.
Ooh, I'd
say that if my mom made any mistakes, it's that she provided a lot more challenge than she provided support. But it made me tough, like I'm tough, I've got grit. But it also didn't always feel great. And so I really try to balance that challenge, but also support, right? Because when you're able to do that, and then people can learn to stand on their own 2 feet, and they feel like they've got ownership over their own accomplishments, and they have choice as well. And that to me is what's most important, is for people to feel like they can actually achieve the things that they decide that they want in their lives.
And so how old are the 3 kids? And then what are your 1, 2, or 3 tips to create or to communicate the balance between supporting them and, telling them to let's get going?
Well, my kids are 24, 22, and 17.
Oh, they're almost gone. You're almost done.
Yeah, just almost gone. And then I think that the tips are to pay attention, right? And to leave space for them and to observe, because one of the things that I learned early on about being the mom of 3 kids is that each one is different. And I thought after having my first son that, I've got this parenting thing down. And then I had my second child, and he was colicky and very, knew his own mind, obstinate. And my first son was pretty easy.
Right.
And my second one was different.
I call it second kid syndrome. Second kid. You're not the only one. And I love my second child. Anthony, what's up? But anyway, I do agree with you. The second one sometimes can be a little bit tough. All right. And then the third one was what?
My third one is a girl. So I had 2 sons and a daughter. And she's been pretty self-sufficient since infancy. I mean, she was one that slept through the night, and she's hardly been ever sick at all. So she's pretty self-sufficient, but it's just a matter of some guidance here and there,
and she's
sometimes encouragement. Yeah,
sure. And she's the only one left at home. Are the other ones gone, or are they still hanging around a little bit?
My oldest just went off to graduate school at Syracuse.
Oh, wow.
And my middle one is still home. He actually made a decision recently to stop going to college and to switch his focus to learning how to code. So he's in a coding boot camp right now.
Sweet.
And then my youngest is a senior in high school, and she's applying to colleges.
So when you think about being in their age from 18 to 25, what do you think about the world is different between when you went through that and what you're doing now? And my guess is you probably don't coach, besides your kids, a lot of people that are young. But what are your younger coaching clients coming to you with in terms of problems or challenges or needs?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I think that the biggest change from whenever I was 18 to 25 is that there was no internet. There was no social media. There were no cell phones, right? It was a completely different world. And you had to learn different skills, right? I mean, and you had to take risks, quite frankly, that you don't have to worry about now.
Right.
Like just driving someplace, you had to make sure you got the directions, right?
Right.
Or you had to stop and be willing to be like, hey, I'm lost. How do I get to this place, right? Now it's like people are, it's interesting because I think that there's a real balance these days between self-reliance or reliance on technology and independent, or I don't know if that's what I meant to say.
Well,
but
tech reliance, right? Right.
Yeah, tech reliance.
Like when
that's
we were
right.
lost,
And so
we don't
have to internalize things. We don't have to learn a lot of things actually, because everything's right there in our supercomputer in our pocket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used to have to pull over, put a quarter in the phone, call and go, I don't know where I am. I mean, really.
I think it made us be a little more adaptable, and we had to learn things and maybe learn some resilience that people now don't have to learn. And I think a lot of times people are lost if they're like, oh my gosh, I don't have any internet service on my phone. So they're completely lost.
I cannot live. I can't order food.
They haven't developed that problem solving ability to be like, oh gosh, what do I do now? But when I was 17 and I ran out of gas on a back road, I had to go to somebody's house and ask them, do you have any gas I can borrow?
Yeah.
Or can I call my mom? I didn't want to call my mom because she would have.
They wouldn't. Yeah, but you're right. They wouldn't think to knock on a door and ask for gas, right? Just because they haven't ever.
Right.
They just always call people. Let's talk about this book called "Winning the Game of Work." That's certainly based on an attitude, I would think, right? That's like gotta be. My favorite saying Zig Ziglar used to say was, "You don't have to love your job, but you gotta love the way you do your job." And that's something that we always talk with our people about, that we coach and when we speak. But number one, why did you write the book, Winning the Game of Work? I think it's a very compelling title. And I think, quite honestly, it's a really great topic for people that are listening right now. Because I think 80%, and you may know better than me, 75 to 80% of the people who are employed are not happy at work. They're not happy with their culture. So tell me, why did you write the book? And then tell me a little bit about what it's about. What does it solve?
Well, when I first got out of college, I'm a first generation college graduate. My dad was in a labor union, worked for the telephone company. He and my mom was a stay-at-home mom until she got a job at the post office. So they did not have to, go into the corporate world and figure out how do you get ahead here. But I was very keen to do that. And I was a good student in school. I thought that, if I just use the skills that propelled me to be successful in school in the workplace, that I'll be successful there too. And it did not take me long to figure out this is a whole different scenario. And I suppose just being pretty persistent and curious, that I started really observing what was going on around me and trying to figure out, okay, this isn't the way I thought it was going to be. So what do you have to do to be successful and to get ahead in the workplace? And so I read a lot of books since the beginning of my career. I was lucky enough to have some mentors that in some ways pulled back the curtain and started pointing out things to me that I was missing. And as I rose to become a manager and a leader, I really wanted to share these insights with people that reported to me and people that I was mentoring, because when you've struggled with something and then somebody actually shines a light on what you actually need to do, I just wanted to share that with people. And really the seeds of the book started around the time that I was considering leaving the corporate world. And I was just thinking back over my career and lessons that I had learned. And I just decided to start blogging. And I blogged for a couple of years on my website. And at some point, somebody pointed out that I probably had enough words for a book. And so that got me thinking like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should write a book. And it just, around that same time, somebody told me about a book writing program that they were going through. So I, brought all my words. I had about 25,000 words, and I brought those into the book writing program. And that was the seeds of the book. And really my motivation for writing it is to make it easier for other people so that they're not falling on their face and becoming frustrated and starting to doubt themselves because they don't even realize then that they're in a game. I mean, I think that's what happens a lot of times, is that many of the things that you need to do to be successful in the workplace are very counterintuitive in terms of like how you interact in other relationships, whether it's school or within your family or among your friend group. And it can feel awkward to learn these skills. And so I wanted to teach people, and I provide a lot of examples, both from my own career, people that I've coached. I interviewed 11 people for the book about their career journeys, and I really wanted to be inspirational and instructional so that people can say, wow, I recognize my situation, and now I can kind of get a little more perspective and understand what options that I have that maybe I haven't thought about to get a different outcome than what I've been doing.
Yeah, I love that. So let's dive into some of that. Tell us how you're able to get recognized for your value on the job, right? There's people that are in their job. I hear it all the time. They don't value me. They don't value me. Yeah. So what's the solution? How do you get recognized for the value on your job?
Well, first of all, ask what is valued. Because sometimes we can think, oh, well, I plan the departmental birthday parties. Like, that's valuable. But listen, the way that I look at it, and I think that this is really true of for-profit businesses, that there's only 3 very basic ways to add value in a business. You are helping them make money, save money, or reduce risk. It is all about growing the top line and reducing the bottom line so the company can be productive and profitable. And I think a lot of people don't really connect the dots between what they do and how it supports the objectives of the business. And the closer that you can align yourself with how you're adding value for the business, the more it's going to be valued. And I think a lot of times people don't step back to say, could we improve this process? Or is there a way to innovate in a way that's going to, I see things. Can I raise my voice to let them know that there's an opportunity here? That is truly adding value for a business. Coming in and being on time every day and turning in your reports, that might be part of your job, but that might not necessarily be adding value. And it's important to kind of step back and get the perspective. And maybe I always say to my clients, if you see something, say something. Because you're in a place where your perspective, nobody else has your exact perspective. And you may be seeing something that could be very important for the business to take into consideration. And, even if we're not in a, quote unquote leadership role, we can lead from anywhere within the organization. And that means, if you've got a good idea, let people know about it. If you see a gap in how things could be done better, step in and do that.
I like it.
Eventually it will be recognized. You might have to overperform for a while at the level that you're at, but if you, quote unquote, play the game, right, you're going to get credit for it.
I love it. I love it.
She said gap.
She did say gap. Yeah. Well done, girl. Nicely done. I always tell people when they go in for an interview or whatever, your only goal with an employer should be to increase their profitability and increase their productivity.
Yes.
And I think if an employer hears those 2 words, they go, oh, that's somebody that, I don't care what the job is. Everybody wants to make more profit. Absolutely. And everybody wants to become more productive. So you touched on a little bit about, the value that you bring, and this gets into this idea of, what's your superpower, which is in your book. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about a lot of people are like, I don't have any superpowers. How do you coach people to find their superpower, and what does that mean to you?
Well, there's a saying that I have, which is you can't read the label from inside the bottle. We are walking around doing the stuff that we do, and often the things that come easy to us and that we're good at, we don't value. And we'll just say, oh, everybody can do this. This is actually one of the things I see a lot with people who are managers or leaders, is that they will make the assumption when they're leading people that how those people would react to the situation. Like they would say, well, I would do this, so naturally anybody else is going to do that too. And I'm like, first of all, if everybody was reacting or responding the way that you do, they'd be sitting in your seat. Okay. So you have to recognize again that there is probably a gap between what your knowledge and what your strengths and talents are and the people that you're leading. And you have to have that self-awareness to say and to appreciate and value yourself, and it's not always easy. And a lot of times people that are in leadership roles or providing value in the company, like, they're humble and they just think, oh, there's nothing special about me. But it's important. Like, if you don't value what's special about you, other people aren't going to do it either. And sometimes you might have to really point that out, like, hey, this is what I did.
I gotcha. And so when you talk about those managers, right? And man, there are plenty of bad managers out there.
Yeah.
I know you address and you talk about how to cope, right? So how do you cope with a bad manager who goes, well, you should just do it the way I do it? And you're like, no, the way you do it sucks, number one. And number two, that's not me. How do you cope with them without getting fired?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that, there is such a thing as managing up. It's funny. I was working with somebody recently and I used the word managing up and they're like, oh, I never heard that before.
I haven't either.
Like,
nice.
Really?
I like term. Great term. Yeah.
Well, bottom line, you're right. Not every manager is a good manager. And unfortunately, many organizations do not teach management. So people who are entrusted with managerial roles a lot of times are modeling their behavior on the terrible managers that they had. And, they do not understand what they're doing, or they don't really see the impact that they're having. They may just be managing the same way that they were managed. And if you are in a role and there are expectations, and for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like you and your boss are seeing eye to eye, you can manage up, and you should manage up. You should go and ask them for what you need. If you need clarity, if you need to, go and sit down with them and say, like, you asked me to do X and I thought I did that. Can you give me some feedback on what I can do better? Like, it's incumbent upon you to get what you need to be able to do a good job. And now sometimes there are bosses who, can't or won't provide that feedback. In those cases, you can sometimes triangulate. You can maybe talk to a peer who's in another department, or you can find a mentor within the organization that can help guide you. Those are, you can take the information that you have and try to use that to get what you need. But it really is incumbent upon you to get what you need, because we can play the victim card all day long and say, well, this is why I'm not performing. And it's not fair that I don't have a boss. Well, guess what? Nobody ever said work was fair, and there's a lot of people that get ahead that, are facing similar challenges, but they're resilient, they're creative, they're persistent. And each of us we can do that too, right? We can find a way to have a different outcome, but we may need to look at the situation differently. We may need to say, like, the reality is my boss is not going to be a leader. And so how do I get what I need for me to perform in spite of the fact that they're not being a good leader?
Yeah. Yeah. What, when you think about all the people you've coached, is there, what's the two biggest issues that keep recurring when you start a coaching relationship? Like, what do you hear most often? And what do you tell them about it?
Well, one of the most common topics that I coach people on is that, I'm working too many hours. I'm so stressed out. There's not enough time in the day to do everything that I'm expected to do. And what I like to help people see is identify leverage points where they can have more impact without working harder or working more hours in the day. And there's, everything from being prioritizing, because one of the things that I see often is that people are they're taking on their projects like gnats, right? Like, they're just, as they're coming, they're just swatting them away, rather than saying, like, taking a step back and saying, what is the most important thing that I should be working on? A lot of times people just work on the most urgent thing, right? And That's not how you get ahead. You get ahead by saying, what is the most important thing? Where am I going to get the most return on the investment of my time and energy? And it may end up that they need to just get comfortable with the fact that they're never going to finish their to-do list.
Right.
But you'll be forgiven for, missing a meeting or not returning an email if you work on the most important thing that, is the great new product that's going to be announced, or you close that big sales deal, or, you finish the project that the CEO is interested in, right? Like that, you'll be forgiven for missing a meeting or two, or, missing a deadline on a smaller project if you get those bigger things across the finish line. So make sure that you're focusing on the important and not the urgent. Things that are other points of leverage are learning how to delegate. For a lot of strong people who, especially those who have risen from an individual contributor level to a manager, their first instinct when something's not going right is to jump in and do it themselves. And I hear it like constantly, it's just quicker for me to do it. And I'm like, no, when you're doing something that you could delegate to someone else, you are not doing something that only you can do. And a big mistake I see for people that rise into management is they are not mentally promoting themselves to the level that they've been promoted to within the organization. And, it's normal to feel a little intimidated or to feel a little scared about having to flex new muscles. But if you've been entrusted with more resources, so that's more people or more budget or more responsibility, it is up to you to get the most return on that investment that's been entrusted to you. And it means that you're going to have to step outside your comfort zone. You're going to have to go back to being a beginner in many ways. Don't fall back into like, oh, it feels good for me to finish this project. If that's not the work that you should be working on, delegate it. And even if it takes somebody else 2 or 3 times longer to do it, it's probably cheaper for the company anyway, because if you're making 2 or 3 times as much as that person, it's cheaper to have them do it than you, even if it takes them longer.
Talk to us about culture. It seems like you're really into working with companies to improve culture. So tell us about that dream. Tell us about what you're seeing. Why did you gravitate toward it? Were you from a bad culture or what? But everybody wants to talk about culture. I teach on culture with the attitude stuff. So give us a little culture lesson for our leaders and managers out there.
Well, I think it goes back to something I was just saying earlier, but it's, having a good culture is about creating an environment that encourages people to step fully into their own potential to support the objectives of the organization. And that requires trust. It requires setting an extremely clear vision. It requires putting the right people in the right roles and then trusting them to do those jobs. And I think that, some of the things that I've just mentioned earlier about mistakes that I see people making, at a managerial level, sometimes this goes all the way up to the CEO. Yeah. And a lot of times people haven't developed the ability to sort of break down what they personally know how to do and train others to step up and do that. And I always say, like, you can't rise any faster than the people underneath you do, right? So as a manager or leader, it's really critical to develop the people under you so that they can do more, because then that frees you to do more, to innovate, to sell more, to, whatever it is, to come up with the next great idea. I see very often, and gosh, I see this so often with organizations where they've got a really coercive way of managing, right? Like if they don't get what they need, and I was actually talking to a client this morning with it from, I would say it's pretty much a household name organization that, and I have a very positive, impression of this company. But she works there, and the way that things get done is through yelling and, bullying. And I'm always a little frustrated and surprised because, when organizations are using this coercive style or dominating style of management, they actually are shutting down the people within the organization. People can't be very creative when they're watching their back, when they're fearful that they're going to get fired, when, every other meeting that they have with their boss is, a smackdown, right? That's not a safe environment. You can't be creative if it feels dangerous.
I think there's some manipulative management styles that are out there, and I've seen it.
Yeah.
And there's books out, and the problem is there's a lot of books, there's a lot of information, a lot of different ways for leaders to go.
Yeah.
And an organization that I was working with, they would instead of just firing you, they would set all these goals and have accountability. And so, every meeting was, okay, you didn't do what you said you were going to do. And so I forget what they called it, but, I was just always a guy like, look, this isn't going to work. You're out of here. But some people, I think because of our laws and firing laws, right, they have to create this path to exiting that is all documented.
The performance improvement plan, the PIP.
Is that what they call it? The PIP.
Yes.
And so it's like, you can tell when somebody's getting ready to get canned, but it takes them 6 freaking months and all kinds of negative. What's your thought on that? What do you tell people about PIP and that whole philosophy, or what have you seen, and what's a way out of that? And is it an effective way to run a company? I mean, hey, look at a lot of companies are very successful, and that's how they do it.
Well, I think a lot of times when people are put on performance improvement plans, there was probably never a good fit to role to begin with.
Right.
And I think a lot of times organizations want to, blame the individual for not fitting into the box that they tried to push them into,
right,
rather than recognizing that maybe it just wasn't the right fit to begin with. Like maybe they shouldn't have hired that person for that role. Or, sometimes there's restructuring and they're like, oh, congratulations, you get to keep your job, but it's going to be this other thing. Right. And maybe it's not a good fit to their, motivational drivers or to their skill set. Right. I do think that it can be hard to come back from a PIP, because I agree with you. I think a lot of times it's just about building the case to, so they don't get sued. So they can say like, look, we gave her 6 months or gave him 6 months to, get up to speed. And, it's really about building that case more so than helping the person improve. And, I hope, and I know that this is not always the case, that there have been conversations before they get to that point to give people feedback about what they need to do better. And I suppose this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that, we're all responsible for our own jobs and for creating the value in exchange for what we get paid. And like I was saying, sometimes you're kind of in a no-win situation because your boss has abdicated responsibility for assigning work, or they're not being clear, or they want to throw you under the bus to, hide their own incompetence. But regardless of all of that, it is important for each individual to take responsibility for that as much as possible. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes you just got to be like, this, I'm never going to win here. But it's up to you to figure out, how do I add value?
I like it. So we are with author, executive consultant, and coach Terry B. McDougall. TerryBMcDougall.com is how you get her. I know you're working on a new coaching program or a new group coaching program. Just maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the nuggets or some of the high points, or what are you trying to do with that? What's your hallucination that you hope it turns into?
Well, hopefully it's not. Hopefully it'll become a reality. I'm working towards it. It's going to be a weekly live presentation and maybe hot seat type coaching. It's a community that will be on livespot.co.
Oh.
And, I work with both organizations and individuals, but I've talked to a lot of people over the course of the last few years about coaching, and not everyone can afford or wants to invest in one-on-one coaching, both from, a monetary and time standpoint. But this is going to be a way for me to be able to share a lot of the lessons that are in my book, but also what I work with people on one-on-one to help people to kind of shift their understanding of what the heck's going on at work, right? I mean, so often people are like really confused and confounded about what they can do differently to get a different outcome, and they feel really trapped. And, my mission really is to help people expand that overlap between their professional success and their personal happiness. It's super frustrating when you're working really hard and you just feel like it's not noticed, or that, you just keep getting the same result no matter what you do. And often it's because people aren't seeing, they're not like kind of peeling back the blinders to see like, oh, there's other options.
Right.
And that's part of what I'm trying to do with the coaching community.
So that's cool, and ultimately that's what I wanted to do with this podcast. It's season 2, Innovators and Influencers. I know that you're trying to innovate the workplace. You're trying to be a leader and a thought leader when it comes to company culture. And so when it's also what I'm hearing is, if you want to win at work, number 1, you need to be aware. Number 2, you need to speak up. Number 3, you probably need to just have a positive that maybe I'm, know what, this is my job. Well, like I always say, my job's my job. The way I do my job is really the secret sauce.
Yeah.
Anything else that I may have missed for our listeners on how do we win at work? Just anything real simple that I've maybe left out?
Well, I think that, just listening to you talk about what we've been discussing here, the way I think about it is that if you want change, there's 3 things that you need to do. The first thing is that you've got to get clear on what your goal is. And I see a lot of times that people they'll talk a lot about what is painful to them. And when I'm first talking to somebody in a coaching session, it's fine. We can vent, right? It hurts. So let's talk about it. But at some point, we've got to flip the table and be like, okay, I've talked a lot about what I don't want. What does ideal look like? What is it that I do want, right? Because you can't go towards something unless you decide what that destination is. Secondly, you've got to shift your mindset to believe that goal is possible. Because so often when I'm talking to people, I say, well, what is it that you want? And they'll say, well, I really want to get promoted, but there's no way it's going to happen. They never promote people like me, whatever that might be, right? And we do that for a reason, because we don't want to be disappointed. We want to protect ourselves from hurt and disappointment. That's natural. But guess what? If you say to yourself, that's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. So, step out, recognize that you're resilient enough to take a couple hits as you're moving towards your goal, but be open, because when you are open, I've seen it so many different times. When you start believing it's possible, the planets will often align to help you get that. And then the third thing is you have to take action, right? Like the whole, hear people talking about manifesting, right? Like I've seen it happen, but it only happens if you take action, right? You can't sit and be like, oh, I want this to happen, and just think it's going to magically happen. So like, get clear on your goal. Get your mindset into a place where you believe it is possible. Even if it feels scary, believe it's possible and start taking actions. And those actions can start with Googling something, calling up your cousin Sally and saying, hey, you work in this industry and I want to know more about it.
Love it.
It does not have to be like quit your job and, move to New York or sell everything and move to India. It doesn't have to be that. It just take one small baby step towards that goal and then just keep going.
So much of what so much of what we talk about is grow or die, right? Attitude booster number 7. And there's no problem, there's no challenge, there's no boss that can overcome your ability to grow through it. And so when I always think about taking action, I'm always, it's it can just be as simple as getting the information. Now we're going to go ahead and close up our interview with you with this thing called Knowledge Through the Decades. I didn't warn you on this.
Okay.
But at the end of our podcast, we ask you to tell us the attitude lesson as you have gone through life. The first one can be a little tough, but I'm sure you can handle it. And so whether it's you, if you remember when you were born, or maybe there was an attitude lesson you learned as you were giving birth, what is the attitude lesson of birth, the beginning of life?
Well, my mom was actually 16 years old when she had me.
Wow.
And my dad was 21. And, I can't remember all the way back to birth, but I do know that my parents were extremely young. My dad took a job that moved us 40 times by the time I was 11 years old.
Wow.
And so the lesson that I learned from very early is to be adaptable.
Amen.
Right? I mean, I had no choice. I literally didn't. I remember crying all the time, like whenever I went to a different school every year between kindergarten and fifth grade in different states.
Crazy.
It wasn't like, okay, it is crazy. It's insane for me to, I hardly believe it, but I lived through it. I don't really remember a lot of it from, before school started, but I do remember my mom telling me and being extremely sad about having to leave my friends. But what I realized, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, the superpower, I didn't give myself credit for how adaptable and courageous I am, because I had to face fear constantly as a child, going into a new school, not knowing anybody. But I learned to pick up on things that other people don't see, right? To see patterns, I've got a really good sense of direction. And maybe part of it is just from like having to go to a new school every year and figure out, like in my mind, how do I like figure out what the diagram of the school is so I can find my way around. So there's not too many curveballs that can
you
be thrown
haven't
at
seen,
me.
right? That you haven't hit. So that's like traumatic and unbelievable. 40 different, that's just crazy. Yeah. What was the job?
He worked on a construction crew for AT&T that was burying the long distance cables throughout the Southeast. So they would be construction projects that might be a couple weeks, they might be a couple months,
right?
But we lived in a trailer. Yeah. I think that maybe when I was an infant, my mom was at home with her parents. And then eventually I think they realized like, okay, well, what can we do to accommodate this lifestyle? And so they bought a trailer and my dad would just hook it up to his pickup truck and we'd move from, trailer park to trailer park. But that allowed our family to stay together. And his job was a better paying job than one if he had been in one place, so they were willing. I suppose that's another lesson that I learned from my childhood is just, when you're a child, you don't know that it's weird that your mom had to drop out of 10th grade to give birth to you. You don't know, right? You just think like, oh, this is what you do. And they were like really resilient, goal-oriented people that were like, this is what we want. And by the time I was in second grade, or third grade, they bought a house and they flipped it. It was the 70s. They flipped the house. I remember us moving into this house. It looked like a bunch of hippies had lived into it before. There were like posters glued to the wall. The kitchen was purple and red, but they renovated the entire house themselves. And so that was another lesson that I learned, that if you set a goal for yourself and you have a strong vision and you're willing to work hard, that you can make incredible things happen. That is actually a vision from seeing my parents do stuff like that has stuck with me.
Wow.
I know it's possible.
Yeah, that's so cool. So I'm going to go ahead and let you give up on being 10 unless you remember something specific in the fifth grade that really shaped your attitude or changed your attitude or affected your attitude. If there was an attitude lesson at 10, you can tell me. But if not, if we covered it, then let's move on to 20 when you, as you said, were a first-generation college student. Do you remember being 20? Mm-hmm. What was the attitude lesson at 20?
I'll skip to 20 because I feel like the first things I talked about were like probably 0 to 10.
Yeah, you covered it.
At 20, it's so interesting because I went to the College of William and Mary in Virginia, which wow. I was so naive. I was, like I said, a blue collar girl. I was really good in school, and so and I was really, really involved in school. But I got into this, second oldest university in the country, early decisions, the only place I applied. And I was there with, people like Colin Powell's son and,
Wow.
Somebody who I didn't know who any of these people were, but here I was among people that, are
Influencers for sure.
Yeah. And I think like Michael Powell, I was in school with him. I think he went on to be like some pretty senior level exec or, leader within the government, like maybe the head of like I don't know, with some department. And, like people from the Coors family and, just really, but I was so clueless. I didn't think that there was anything special about me, and so I think just learning lessons of, I don't know, just showing up and being able to just figure things out and be exposed to things that I hadn't been exposed to before. It really opened my eyes up to possibilities in life, just to, and also to realize that, if you just show up and you're curious and you want to take action, like you can really make things happen. And also that, people are willing to help you, and I think that was something that I really thought that I had to do everything on my own.
That's cool.
I wish that was a lesson that I had learned earlier, is to, be a little bit vulnerable and to actually ask for help, because the lesson that I thought, and, I suppose it's a double-edged sword. I think that I actually say to people that I think that people's greatest weakness is their greatest strength overused.
Yes.
And, to be self-sufficient is a good thing. That's a strength. But if to not ask for help when you can use it is a weakness.
Right. Well, and it can affect your attitude too. So gappers, I want you all to just think about right now, who can you go ask for help about whatever problem there is? And if you want to improve your attitude, to sit on a problem and fester and let it compound and let it own you, when you know that there's answers out there, when you know that there are people that care enough about you to talk about it, let's use Terry's advice. And you know what? Let's make just a commitment or an intention to go ask somebody for help in the next 24 hours. I think your attitude will improve. How about when you were 30? Tell us about when you got to 30 and what your attitude lesson was there.
Actually, can I just throw one thing in to what you just said to the gappers?
Yes.
You often are giving a gift to someone when you ask them to help you, because much like my situation, I struggled a lot. And if I can help somebody else not to struggle so much, it's a gift to me.
Yeah.
It makes me feel like it was worth my struggle to be able to help someone. And I think a lot of people look at that and think that, oh, this is a burden. It's like, no, people want to tell their story of how they got to where they are and what they can do to help you. So just keep that in mind. You might actually be giving somebody a gift if you ask them for help in the right way,
I love it. That's great.
When I was 30, let me think, like, when was I 30? Okay. I actually quit my job when I was 29. I just quit it and went back to business. I went back to business school full time. And the lesson that I took from that is that I was sitting at this job. I was doing well at the job. I'd worked there for about 4.5 years. But one of my closest girlfriend at work got married and she moved away, and I'm sitting there at work and I'm realizing, this realization came upon me that everything was going to change around me. And if I didn't do something to change it, that I might wake up one day and be like, where am I? Like, what happened? Like I could feel it starting to change. And so it was 1993 and I picked up the phone and I called University of Maryland and I was like, when's your deadline for the MBA program? It was like May. And they said, Friday. I mean, literally. And this is before, you could just go online and get an application. I called my boyfriend, who's now my husband. And he was actually going to school at University of Maryland. And I said, can you stop by the business school and pick up an application? And he did. I got in. And, by August, I was doing trust falls and orientation with my class. And I did not know how I was going to pay for it either. but I
Sure.
figured it out.
Yeah.
And so I think that, taking bets on yourself, and when you realize that things aren't the way that you want them to be, do something.
Right. Take action, like we just
Yeah.
talked about, right?
Yeah.
So I think the attitude lesson is take action. Now, gappers, she's not saying go quit your job and go get an MBA and not know how to pay for it. But you know what? If you're in a place where you're not happy, bet on yourself and do it. That's an awesome story. Are you Go ahead.
Like I told you when we started, I can talk about this stuff. The big lesson that I learned is that if you want something, put your foot on the path and start walking. There's curves. You can't see around the corner, but you're never going to see around the corner unless you start. And, what I learned in that was that, I got an assistantship, which gave me some free credits and gave me discounted credits. My boss at my job gave me freelance work. I got a loan. I figured it out.
Sure.
But I never would have known about some of those resources had I not started.
Mm-hmm. I love it. That's just so good. And now you're 40. I'm guessing this is mommy time.
Yeah.
Tell me about your attitude lesson at 40.
Well, my youngest child was born when I was 39, like a few months before I turned 40. And, it's funny because a lot of people, it's like kind of a crisis when you turn 40. I wasn't thinking about that at all, right? I had 3 kids, I had a job. I don't know. I mean, I think that during that time, it was just enjoying the sweetness of the family that we had created.
Cool.
And learning how to balance all of that. Now, I will say that when I was 41, I ended up getting a big promotion after a pretty humiliating failure.
Really? Well, I mean, we got to know. Tell us about the failure and tell us how you got the promotion.
Yeah. So I was I worked in marketing for a large bank. And I was kind of the right-hand person to my boss who ran marketing for one of the divisions. And, he relied on me very heavily for, helping him to strategize, to develop communications and so forth. He ended up leaving the company. And I said to myself, I think I worked there for about 8 or 9 years. And I said, I think I'm ready to step up. And so I applied for his job. I didn't do anything special. I was just sort of like stupid. I just thought, everybody knows me. They know I do a good job. I've worked here for a long time. And I got through the first interview with HR. And then the second interview was a panel interview with colleagues that were in a different city. And I didn't do anything to prepare. I just went in. I was like, hey, you guys all know me. I bombed. I just bombed. I was nervous. I had not thought through the things that I actually teach my clients now about, like, think about how you add value. I was the person walking around in the bottle, not being able to read my label. I wasn't thinking about how do people see me? How do I influence how people see me? How do I explain the value that I add? And so I got eliminated from the process. But I said to myself, that hurt so bad that I think there's something called a career coach. This is like the early 2000s. And so coaching wasn't as big of a thing, but I knew that there was something like that. So I found somebody in my community and I worked with her for a few months. And weirdly enough, they went through the whole process to fill that role. And the person they offered the job to turned it down.
Oh my gosh.
And so they started all over. And I was like, well, I guess I'll throw my hat in the ring again. I don't know if I'm a glutton for punishment or whatever, but I just was like, okay, whatever, I'll do it. They might not even interview me, but they did. And this time I showed up very differently because I had practiced. How do I talk about the value that I add? I went out and I bought new clothes so that I looked like a leader. I mentally promoted myself to this role.
Good.
And my last interview was another panel interview with the CEO of the division and his 2 top executives. I remember clear as day sitting in his top floor executive conference room. I was very confident. I was, like, Bob, this is, I was doing what I think that I needed to do to be seen as a CMO. Unfortunately, it was me and an external candidate, and they offered the role to the external candidate. And that hurt, but I played to win that time. And so I didn't feel as bad because I knew I did my best, and they just, made a decision. Maybe they wanted some new blood. But, we were talking about the planets aligning. The day I found out I didn't get the job, I went to lunch, and when I came back, there was a voicemail on my phone from an executive recruiter. And over the course of the next, say, 3 to 4 months, I interviewed with several companies. I got 2 job offers, and I was actively interviewing for a 3rd job. And I took one of those job offers that I got. It moved my family here to Chicago. It increased my income to the point that we decided that my husband would stay home with our kids. And it really put me on a very different trajectory for my career.
Wow.
And so very proud of myself for getting up.
I love it. That's so good. Yeah, that's so good. So since I can do math, you have to be 50, but my God, Jason, the girl does not look 50. Am I wrong?
You are not wrong.
Are you 50?
Yeah. I mean, my
gosh.
next milestone birthday is not that far away.
Oh, well, I can't take you to 60 if you're not. But so let's just go ahead and tell us what your attitude lesson was at 50.
Let me think. What was my attitude lesson at 50? Gosh, it's hard to.
Where were you?
Remember?
Where were you working?
Well, I was working.
Did you have a birthday party? Yeah.
Yes, actually, we went to the Dominican Republic to celebrate. We had a birthday party at my house, and then my husband and I and some friends went to the DR to celebrate, and it was awesome. It was fun. Mm-hmm. I think that at that point, it was really sort of like hitting my stride as a leader. And, I had learned the lessons, that I coach on now and that I wrote about in my book. I really was looking at work as a game. I was realizing that the disappointments or the times that you're not getting what you want, or even when you're getting feedback, that it's not personal.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I was really just playing it like a player, not like, oh, you're rejecting Terry or you don't like me or anything like that. I was like, whatever, it's a job. Mm-hmm. Right. And there's a lot of reasons why people do the things that they do. I really try to help my clients to, stop and look at, get to know the players that you're playing with in the game, right? Yes. Think about things from their perspective, like what's motivating them. That was kind of probably one of the biggest surprises that I had in my career, was to, start to recognize that people have different reasons for why they do what they do. And It's not all necessarily about doing the best thing for the company. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of people that are really self-serving, or, maybe there are things that I'm not seeing, like they're in a meeting with senior leadership and they have information that I don't have.
Right.
Right. And it's so easy for us to judge and, I think if we can stay loose and stay agile in the way that we see things, and very importantly, not to take it personally, right? Like if there's a disappointment or you're getting some feedback that you don't like stand with yourself, support yourself.
I love it.
That's
killer advice. That is such good advice. And you can just see as we did that exercise who you were and who you've become. And I'm so excited for you. I'm so happy that you came to the Get Attitude podcast. I think you've dropped some great information on our people. I think you've dropped some great information on how they can succeed better at work and how to take action. So I guess, just on a personal note or as a motivational, it's time for you to put on a motivational speaker's hat now if you want. What's your message to our gappers for the future? We always just like to give you the final word on, what's your message of hope? What's your message of positiveness for the folks that are listening for their life and their professional lives, if you want to say something?
Yeah. What I want to say is that to every listener out there, you are worthy, and recognize that you came to Earth with unique gifts that nobody else has. And your purpose here on Earth is to figure out, how do you use those gifts? Okay. And don't be defined by your job title or anything like that. Like, just know that you're worthy and stay on that path to find your purpose.
I love it. Terry Boyle McDougall, you are awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the Get Attitude podcast. We will be seeing you on the next week. And we look forward to having you go to terrybmcdougall.com and checking her out. This is Glenn Bill signing off for the Get Attitude Podcast.